What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for my Week 11 college football playoff ranking projection. I'm going to try to project what the rankings will look like this week. Of course, the first rankings came out last week, and there were some surprises in there, and there were some things that made absolutely no sense, which I talked about last week. And so trying to figure out what this committee is going to do this week. On the one hand, it's a little easier because we have these first rankings, so we kind of know what they think about each team, but they also didn't really follow what they were supposed to do in the first ranking, so who knows what they're going to do this week. They may just change things around and once again make no sense. My rankings projections for the very first rankings were not great, but if you look around at some of the other projections, I couldn't find any other projections that were more accurate than mine. Sure, there were a lot of things wrong, but most teams I was within one spot of. I had Tennessee at number 1. I had LSU at number 10. I didn't have Texas in there. Because they shouldn't have been there. UCF shouldn't have been there. Like I said, there's a lot of things that just didn't make any sense. But based off of what they did last week, let's go ahead and project what they're going to do this week. And I'm going to give you the top 25, how it should look. So I'm going to tell you what, if the committee followed their own rules, what the top 25 would look like, and show you how different it is and where they are not doing what they're supposed to do. So let's go and start at the bottom. All right, I think Oklahoma State will still stay in here. I know they've gotten beat. A couple of bad losses here. Not to bad teams, but just the way they've lost the last couple of games. But if you look at their resume, it's still strong enough, I think, where they barely hang on at number 25. Could see Liberty possibly sneak in there at 25. Maybe even a Washington team with 2 losses. But I think it's going to be Oklahoma State because, again, the resume is still decent, even with the 3 losses. Wake Forest, kind of the same thing. These 3 loss teams don't really have any bad losses. It's not like they've lost to really bad teams. And so I think that's what's going to keep them in the top 25. Illinois is interesting. I've got them at number 23. They were 16 last week. I don't know that they dropped that much. Dropping all the way out of the top 25. Again, based off of where they were last week. But they could drop out because they lost to a bad Michigan State team. They also have a loss to a bad Indiana team. So the losses for Illinois are not good at all. But kind of the positives for Illinois, the fact that Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa all won on Saturday. So those are 3 teams that Illinois has beaten. So those teams are looking better, which helps the resume. But again, what do you do with those losses? Because they lost to bad teams. This is a tough one for me, but I think the committee's going to put them around number 23. Notre Dame is a similar team. This is a tricky one. I don't know what the committee is going to do with Notre Dame. They didn't rank them last week, but you're talking about a team that has 2 wins over 1-loss teams. They are the only team that has beaten Clemson. They are the only team that has beaten North Carolina. That's impressive. That is very impressive. But at the same time, they've lost to Marshall and they lost to Stanford, 2 pretty bad teams. I don't really know what the committee is going to do with Notre Dame. This is definitely a tricky one. But I think they'll rank them just because of those wins. And I think Florida State, I talked about them last week. They should have been ranked last week. There was absolutely no reason for Florida State to not be ranked. They should have been ahead of Texas. If a 3-loss team was going to get in, it should have been Florida State. They have a win over a really good LSU team. That is a very, very good win for them. And then they also have a win over a pretty good Louisville team. So 2 good wins. They haven't lost any bad teams. You look at what they just did on Saturday. They blew out Miami. This team absolutely should. If Florida State's not ranked this week, I don't know. But they absolutely should be ranked. And I'll show you where they really should be ranked here in just a minute. But let's go 16 through 20. I think UCF moves up to number 20. Beat Memphis this past weekend. I don't think they should be ranked. 1 win over Cincinnati. That's it. There's just nothing on the resume. A loss to East Carolina. This team should not be ranked, but based off of where they were last week, I think the committee will put them at 20. Kansas State at number 19, a loss to Texas. They haven't lost any bad teams, so I think Kansas State is still sitting there pretty good. I think they will be ranked with the 3 losses. I think Texas will be just ahead of them with 3 losses. Texas ranked a little too high, but I think they should be ranked this week. But 6-3 for them. The committee talks about how they almost beat Alabama. Well, look, Alabama's now a 2-loss team, so Texas should not be at number 18, but they should be probably out of Kansas State. And I think the committee, based off of where they had them last week, will move them up to number 18. NC State at 17. It's tricky with NC State and Tulane. where should these two teams be? Maybe NC State should be ahead of Tulane, but Tulane was ahead of them last week. Both teams won. I don't know if NC State. Now, NC State did add a nice win over Wake Forest, so because they added to their resume, I wouldn't be surprised if NC State was 16, Tulane at 17, but I'm going to project it to go like this just because of where the teams were in those first rankings last week. Let's move on now, 11 through 15. These I feel pretty confident. I feel very confident on these 5 teams. I don't really see any reason to move any of them around. UCLA is big time underrated. They should be much higher. They have a win over Washington and a win over Utah, but whatever. The committee just doesn't like UCLA for some reason. They love USC. I think they got those two teams backwards. But Ole Miss didn't play, so they're going to probably stay right there. UCLA still has the win over Utah. Penn State should still be ahead of North Carolina. North Carolina didn't look great. So there's no reason to change anything here. I think these 5 teams will all be in this order. So now we get to the top 10. This is where there's actually going to be some drama this week because of the losses. Clemson losing, Alabama losing. Those are some big losses. Tennessee losing. So how does it wind up? Again, I'm trying to project what this committee is going to do based off of what we've seen in these first rankings. So it's hard to say for sure, but this is how I see the rankings looking on Tuesday night. Now, again, not what they should look like, but what I think they will do. And so I think USC is at number 10. I do think LSU will move on up, so USC will drop 1 spot. USC should not be ranked that high. They struggled to beat a pretty bad Cal team. They are big time overrated. Their one win over Oregon State by 3 points. That's the only thing on the resume. Oregon State just lost. They now have 3 losses, so that's not even a great win. So yes, USC should not be at 10, but based off of where they were last week, I think the committee will put them at 10. Alabama at number 9. I don't think the committee is going to drop them all that much because of the teams they lost to. A loss to LSU, who is at number 7. A loss to Tennessee, who is in the top 5. You lost to 2 really good teams. The resume, though, you look at the wins. You got Mississippi State, Arkansas. There's not a lot for Alabama on the resume. Texas is a top 25 win. I guess that's their best win, and they did go on the road and win that game. But based off of what the committee did last week, as much as they seem to like Alabama, I think they just dropped them to number 9. Some people think Clemson's going to drop out of the top 10. I disagree. I think they will put them at number 8, ahead of Alabama. They were ahead of Alabama last week by a few spots, so I don't see them dropping below Alabama, even though they did lose by a lot to Notre Dame. But Notre Dame, I think, will be ranked this week, so that's not going to look like a terrible loss, although they did, the performance was not great in that game. But they still have wins over Wake Forest, NC State, and Florida State. Those are teams that I think will be ranked. Syracuse will be right there, I think, just outside the top 25. They're a 3-loss team, so you still got enough wins there to where I think Clemson is still going to be ranked in the top 10. I think they wind up at number 8. I do think LSU will pass them. You can't ignore the resume that they're starting to put together. A win over Alabama, a win over Ole Miss, 1 loss coming to Tennessee, who's a top 5 team, and then the other loss coming in a very close game in the very first game of the season against Florida State, who I believe now will be ranked. So I think LSU probably shoots up to number 7. And again, if they can win out and win the SEC, this team will probably be in the college football playoff. Oregon at number 6, they took care of business against Colorado. I don't think that LSU will jump all the way ahead of Oregon. It wouldn't surprise me just because I think the committee really does like the SEC, but no reason really to move LSU up higher than Oregon. So I feel pretty confident that it's going to be Oregon at 6, LSU at 7. I think Clemson will be 8 and Alabama will be 9. And then it's possible they could penalize USC for struggling against Cal and the fact that Oregon State lost. So if they do the right thing, they will drop USC, but I don't expect them to do the right thing, and I think they'll keep them at number 10. So let's go to the top 5. I think people will disagree with how I see these rankings playing out, but this is what I think the committee is going to do. I think Georgia is clearly going to be number 1. Ohio State will clearly be number 2. Really no debate there. I think Tennessee's going to drop to 3. I think the committee showed us last week that they are not very high on Michigan when they had them behind Clemson. Tennessee lost on the road by 14 points against Georgia, and this is still a Tennessee team with 2 top 10 wins, a win over LSU, a win over Alabama. and again, didn't get blown out by Georgia. It wasn't all that close, but I think they were close enough to where they're not going to drop much. So I think Tennessee will be at 3. I think most people would like to see them behind Michigan and behind TCU. But look, they're 2-1 against the top 10. Michigan is 0-0 against the top 10. TCU has not played a top 10 team. So I don't think they're going to penalize Tennessee for having to play 3 top 10 teams and winning 2 of those 3 games. I think the Vols will be at number 3. And keep that in mind as I show you what I think the rankings should look like in just a second. But Michigan should still stay ahead of TCU. No reason for TCU to jump them. The committee doesn't seem to like TCU. What if they even put LSU ahead of TCU or Oregon ahead of TCU? That wouldn't shock me, but it would absolutely be wrong. TCU has some very nice wins. They're undefeated. TCU, I think, will be at number 5. If they really penalize Tennessee for that loss, I could see them dropping them to number 5. But I don't think they go to 4. I think they'll be 3 or they'll be 5, unless the committee just really thinks Michigan is way better than TCU. But I think they're going to be at number 3. So that's what I think the committee is going to do. Here's how the rankings should look. If the committee followed their own guidelines, this is what the top 25 would look like. And back to that Tennessee point, again, because of who they have played, because of their schedule, Tennessee really should be the number 2 team in these rankings. I know people are not going to like to hear that, but based off of the guidelines, again, 3 games against top 10 teams. They're 2-1 in those games. Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, they haven't played any top 10 teams. So Tennessee should not be penalized. They should actually be the number 2 team. Now, these teams will have a chance to pass Tennessee. I think, a conference champion Ohio State, a conference champion TCU, even a conference champion Oregon maybe not Oregon, but TCU, Ohio State, if they win their conference championship, then the committee follows the guidelines, they would go ahead of Tennessee. But based off of where the things stand right now, Tennessee should be number 2, Ohio State 3, Michigan 4, TCU 5, Oregon 6, LSU 7. That's kind of, those teams are how I think the committee is going to do it. UCLA, I think, should actually be at number 8. When you look at, again, a couple of wins over 2 lost teams, Washington and Utah, 1 loss coming on the road at Oregon. UCLA should be number 8. Then Clemson and Alabama. Utah should be ahead of USC. I talked about how USC is overrated. They should be at about 12. Ole Miss 13, North Carolina 14, Penn State 15, NC State 16, 17, Tulane. I think Florida State should be number 18. I still believe that the committee is underrating them big time. I don't think the committee is going to put Louisville in the top 25, but I think they should be at number 19 based off of what they've done. Remember, they have a win over UCF, and UCF was ranked by the committee. Again, some of this stuff makes no sense. Notre Dame at 20, Wake Forest 21, Texas at 22, Kansas State 23, Oklahoma State 24. And I think Liberty's done enough to be ranked. You have a close loss to Wake Forest, who was a top 25 team, and then they went on the road and beat an SEC team in Arkansas. Not a bad team. I think Arkansas 5-4 now. So I think Liberty should be ranked as well. UCF should not be ranked, but they will be because they were last week and they won. So that's what I believe the committee should do. I think that's what the rankings should look like if they followed their own guidelines, their own criteria. But we all know they're not going to, and they're going to just do whatever they want. And again, based off of what they did last week, I just showed you what I think the committee is going to do this week. Give me your thoughts. How do you think the committee will rank them? Do you think Tennessee drops to 3 or 5? Some of these other big things, how far do you think Clemson will drop? Alabama will drop? Let me know what you think the rankings are going to look like down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.